What's up, world? It's your man, MrSan44Man, seen in 80 plus countries around the world. Dig this here. I'm down here at the old concrete place. I was going to do my next shot up there to have my big backdraft for the city, but they told me, my man caught me climbing up there and he told me, hey, you can't go up there. So I got to go down here to New Center Stamping because New Center owns this now. What this place is the old concrete facility. They used to make concrete here. This place here made a lot of the buildings that you see on my show and that you see downtown and all this all around the city of Detroit. I don't know where the new place is, but that is the old facility. I used to watch it work out. It's been there for a while. But dig this here. I'm going to go down there, talk to the people over here at the stamping plant, find out if I can walk up there, do this, and make sure it happens. And you know you're going to see it first on the MrSan44Man show. Now check this out. I told y'all I was going to change the game on my show. I show so much stuff, and I'm seen in 80 plus countries around the world. So my fans around the world, I need to show you some activities and things that's happening in your part of the world and show it to my part of the world. So what I'm going to do is, not only am I going to show you American news footage, but I'm also show you some foreign news footage from the BBC World News America. So therefore you'll get to see different countries that I have that watch my show, like Kenya, China, Russia, Venezuela, Czechoslovakia, whatever country in the world you can think of, watch my show. So therefore, I'm gonna make sure that I cater to y'all a little bit more because I've been giving y'all the perspective from America, and I need to get y'all out there focused too. But check this out. I'm gonna make sure that I talk to the people that I need to, necessary to work up in here, so I can walk up on that tower and get y'all a nice little black draft view of the city of Detroit. Even though it's fucked up, y'all see a lot of fucked up shit on my show, a lot of news reports, a lot of folks get fucked up and killed around here. But we do have some good spots. We do have a lot of talented people out here that are graffiti artists. That's why I always have my backdraft with a lot of graffiti artists so I can show what they do out here. I wish they could have some jobs because they'd be some talented individuals for some company. But it ain't working out like that, so they got to expose it any way they can. So that's why I'm here. It's your man, MrSan44Man, looking out for anybody. RIP, rest out to Hugo Chavez. Even though, you know, America wasn't so good for him, hey, that was my man, because you know what I'm saying, he looked out for the poor people. That's why he got 2 fucking million plus people wanting to see that man be buried. I'm gonna give him shots out. RIP to him. Hey, this is your man, MrSan44Man, seen in 80 countries around the world. Check me out. I got also some clips. I was down there at the HQ. I got B Street. She had a party last night, so I'm gonna make sure that I get that footage on there. But I'm gonna do this on a 2-part story with the stories from overseas as well as this scene right here for the HQ. All right, now I'll get back with y'all. MrSan44Man, hit me up, YouTube, Google me. You know I'm all over the place. It's your man, MrSan44Man. Peace.
This is BBC America, and now live from London, BBC World News.
Hello, I'm Karen Giannoni. You're watching BBC World News. Our top stories: fury in North Korea over another round of UN sanctions. Kim Jong-un's regime tears up its non-aggression pact with the South. Activists in Kenya have launched a legal challenge which could halt counting in the country's general election. More than 2 million Venezuelans pay their last respects to the late President Hugo Chavez. His funeral will be held in a few hours' time. And US Catholics suffer a crisis of faith as a cardinal who's been stripped of all public roles heads off to Rome to choose a new pope. Hello, China has called for calm and restraint after North Korea responded to new United Nations sanctions with threats of nuclear war. The world's most secretive and isolated state has said it's scrapping all non-aggression pacts with its neighbour South Korea, closing its crisis hotline with Seoul and shutting their shared border crossing. China, Pyongyang's only major ally, voted in favour of stiffer UN sanctions against North Korea following its third nuclear test last month. From Seoul, Lucy Williamson has more.
North Korea's military is in training. Large-scale exercises on land, on sea and in the air. A show of force, perhaps, to match their leaders' fiery threats. Pyongyang said on Friday it was ending all non-aggression pacts with the South and shutting down the main hotline between the two countries. It's already threatened to carry out a preemptive nuclear strike and withdraw from Korea's 60-year-old armistice agreement.
We don't make empty threats. If we say we'll strike, we'll strike. If we say we'll fight and be victorious. Those who try to infringe our sovereignty will not be able to escape our grasp.
But those threats have done nothing to deter its powerful critics. The UN Security Council on Thursday voted in tough new sanctions, unanimously. Even China, North Korea's only major ally, said yes. But that's not the only reason North Korea is anxious. Massive joint military exercises between the US and South Korea are taking place just across the border. A second round of drills is set to begin on Monday, when Pyongyang is due to withdraw from the current truce. The new government in Seoul said if provoked, it would turn the military exercises straight into a counter-attack. In the days leading up to the Monday deadline, North Korea's nightly news has been showing its young leader touring frontline units, greeting his troops and talking about enemy targets to the south. Inside the North Korean capital, public transport has reportedly been fitted with camouflage netting and a large rally held to protest the latest sanctions. It might sound like the path to war, but the armistice agreement and the communications hotline have been broken many times in the past. The situation may be less predictable, less stable as a result of Pyongyang's threats, but the risks of escalation are every bit as great for North Korea itself. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Seoul.
Andrea Berger is a research fellow in nuclear analysis at the Royal United Services Institute here in London, and she's with me in the studio. Andrea, how do you interpret what is coming out of North Korea? Is it particularly worrying, or have we heard it all before?
It certainly is worrying. We've heard degrees of belligerence from North Korea, but this is certainly a higher degree of belligerence than what we've heard previously. North Korea seems to be responding to two developments. So one is the passage of a new UN sanctions resolution on North Korea that has some tighter sanctions in that package. But the other is plans to host new rounds of military exercises between the US and South Korea on the Korean Peninsula or in the region. And that is seen as very worrying by Pyongyang. So their announcement that they might cancel the armistice agreement to declare it dead is a response to the latter.
Right, so it's not just the sanctions, it's also a matter of these military exercises. I mean, in terms of defusing tension with North Korea as volatile as it is, what would the way out be? How do you move forward? Because obviously the West, US, South Korea don't want to be seen to back down.
It's difficult to say because we speak to North Korea so seldomly. So really, in this particular instance, we'll have to have a swift conversation with North Korea to assess whether or not perhaps scaling down military exercises would be sufficient for North Korea to call off its very large desire to cancel the armistice agreement, or do we want to call their bluff? That's a decision that governments will have to make in a very short timeline.
Andrea, I mean, just looking at what we've had from North Korea over recent weeks and months, are we starting to get a clearer idea of the character, if you like, of the new North Korean regime, which had been such a mystery?
There's a lot of speculation over what Kim Jong-un's policies might be. now what we're seeing is more what Kim Jong-un is not. And he doesn't seem to be the conciliatory reformer we'd hoped he might be. He seems to be falling very much in line with the policies of his father and his grandfather and preserving the military-first approach that North Korea has always had.
So no apparent change. Andrea Berger, thank you very much from the Royal United Services Institute here in London. Thanks. Let's go to Kenya now, because the High Court is considering a legal challenge that could halt counting in the country's presidential elections. Activists want the Electoral Commission to stop announcing results until steps have been taken to address their concerns over the process, including a software bug that multiplied the number of rejected ballot papers by a factor of 8. Well, with more than 3/4 of the results announced, Uhuru Kenyatta is leading, but it's not yet clear whether he has won enough of the vote to avoid a runoff. Let's go over to the BBC's Anne Soy in Nairobi. Anne, what is the latest there?
Interesting developments here. The High Court adjourned a few hours ago to reconstitute about an hour and a half after now to determine whether it has authority to hear this case. Now, these 30 civil society organizations are seeking to challenge the credibility of this election. It is interesting also that several observer missions, including the African Union and the European Union, have passed a clean bill of health on this election process. They both say that this has been a free, fair and credible election. So we are watching to see what comes out of the court in about an hour and a half from now.
Right, and has that legal process thrown the timescale into even more uncertainty about when we might have a definitive result?
That is right, but activities here are still underway. The Electoral Commission keeps coming every now and then to read more results from the constituencies, with just less than a quarter of the constituencies yet to report their results. We are waiting to see. Well, of course, the Constitution allows it up to Sunday evening to declare the final results.
Okay, Anne, thank you very much for updating us. Anne Soy there in Nairobi with the very extraordinary scenes in the Venezuelan capital. Queues several kilometres long as millions of people lined up to pay their last respects to President Hugo Chavez, who died on Tuesday. His funeral takes place later in a few hours from now in Caracas. More than 30 heads of state are expected to attend. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad of Iran flew in overnight. And in the last hour, Sebastián Piñera of Chile has arrived. Well, a little later, his deputy, Nicolás Maduro, will be sworn in as a caretaker president. Will Grant reports from Caracas.
The government had called for a celebration of Hugo Chavez, and it was certainly that. Rather than the funereal black, the colour of choice was red. Socialist red, the colour of the revolution. They came from across Venezuela, and by any means they could. And they were prepared to wait for as long as it took to say goodbye to a man they credit for pulling them out of poverty.
People have spent hours flocking down from the hillsides of Caracas to take a final look and to say a last adios to the man they credit for changing their lives and for empowering the poor in Venezuela.
Some of his most ardent supporters were overcome with emotion after seeing his remains.
It's sad, because this is the last time that I'll see his body and his face, singing and fighting for the rights of the people and of the nations around the world.
So many turned out, in fact, that the government took a radical decision. Mr. Chavez's remains would stay lying in state for another 7 days.
El comandante Chávez va a estar en posibilidad de ser visto.
The Venezuelan people will be able to see Commander Chavez for at least another 7 days, so that everyone can see him without limitations.
Una limitación. Hay de verdad millones. Y de verdad.
Millions have been queuing to see him, and we want that everyone who wants to see him can.
Heads from as many as 33 states around the world are due to send representatives to the funeral, from close allies such as Evo Morales of Bolivia to Mr. Chavez's bitter enemy, the United States. But in death, political differences have been put to one side briefly to pay respects to Chavez the man, if perhaps not Chavez the politician. Meanwhile, the faithful, ordinary people who have been queuing around the clock to glimpse Mr. Chavez have been granted another week to say goodbye. Will Grant, BBC News, Caracas.
Business with Jamie, and coming up shortly will be the all-important monthly jobs figures from the US.
Yes, they are important. They've always been for many, many years now. It's really important psychologically, almost emotionally to American people, because it's about jobs, and jobs mean so much to so many. The report is likely to demonstrate an economic recovery that really is continuing, but slowly. Analysts expect to show the economy did add 152,000 jobs. The unemployment rate, that's probably dipped just a little bit, down from 7.9 to 7.8% of the workforce in January. Now, the relatively slow rate of progress on jobs is being blamed on weak demand from the income-squeezed households. Companies are very cautious about hiring new people, of course.
Stargazers have the opportunity to track a comet this week as one makes a close encounter with the Earth. The comet, which is elegantly named C2011 L4 Pan-STARRS, should be visible with binoculars or a telescope in the northern hemisphere later tonight. Now, in upcoming days, it should be visible even to the naked eye. Well, let's get some explanation of what's going on with the BBC Science correspondent Rebecca Morrell. Rebecca, it has been a busy time in the skies lately.
It has. We've had asteroids passing us by, meteors raining down over Russia, and now it's the turn of the comet. But comets are quite rare, actually. You only get them sort of normally about every 10 to 15 years, a chance to see a bright one in the sky. And this one is particularly unusual because it started off its life way out on the outer edge of the solar system in a beautifully named place called the Oort cloud, which is packed full of comets, and it got nudged off its orbit, and for the last few million years it's been sort of hurtling towards us. It's not going to hit us or anything like that, it's going to fly by, and for the next few days it's going to be swinging past the northern hemisphere and should be a great chance to see this comet in the sky.
So if you live in the southern hemisphere, you've actually already had the chance to see it. It's now the northern hemisphere's turn to have a look.
Yeah, that's right. So the best sort of time to see the comet is it's going to appear from this evening, so from tonight, and you'll just see it over the horizon to the west.
Right, we've got a picture.
Here we go.
See that there's its
path. So tonight you might get a glimpse, and then the best time really though is the 12th and 13th, because it's going to start getting really, really bright. And the best way to look for it, handily, the moon is a crescent moon at that time. So if you look up towards the moon with your binoculars, and then you go down a bit and to the left, you should be able to see this lovely comet sitting there, and it'll be a bright ball of light, probably about as bright as a star, with a big tail trailing behind it. So it should look fantastic.
Rebecca, in 10 seconds, can you just say a comet's made of ice?
Yes.
The meteor that we saw over Russia, completely different.
Yeah. So and they come from different places in space too. So think of a comet as a dirty snowball hurtling through space, and think of an asteroid as a sort of lump of rock and metal.
Great stuff, Rebecca. We hope the skies to be clear to see the dirty snowball. Rebecca Morrell, thank you. The season kicks off in China today, just days after a 3-year investigation into match fixing came to an end. Dozens of officials, players and referees have been jailed or banned for life, as John Sudworth reports.
After years enmeshed in filth, Chinese football is limbering up for a fresh start. The bad things are in the past, this player says. It's going to get better. China has been getting tough on graft, with more than 50 officials, referees and players sent to jail. Last month, the 3-year investigation ended with the banning of 33 people from the game for life. Former professional players like Shang Yi say that at its height, the corruption was blatant. One game became quite famous, he says. My team went on strike and refused to play because the referee was so biased. Now the arrival in China of star names like Didier Drogba and Nicolas Anelka is perhaps a sign that things might really be changing. But the fact that they both lasted barely half a season, with rumours over financial disputes at their Shanghai club, suggests problems persist. At the start of a new season, as the justifiably cynical fans trudge through the turnstiles and up the stadium steps, the truth is there is not a club in Chinese football that has not been touched by the rot. Attendances are slowly improving again, but with Europe now facing its own match-fixing scandal, China's experience should serve as a warning to the world. If you let corruption grow unchecked, these fans tell me, you risk losing supporters forever.
They don't want to watch it again because it is not a real match.
We think we've been cheated and everything is fake and we don't believe it.
China has recently appointed David Beckham as a football ambassador in the hope that his clean image will rub off a bit. But the real test will be longer term and measured in empty seats. John Sudworth, BBC News.
The future of the Roman Catholic Church in the Vatican. High on the list of priorities is surely tackling the ongoing fallout from the clergy sexual abuse crisis. In the States, the legacy of cover-ups by the hierarchy has cost the church dear in dollars and in reputation. Jane Little reports from Los Angeles.
Sunday Mass in Beverly Hills. The faithful have been coming here since the early days of Hollywood. The funerals of Valentino, Sinatra and Hitchcock took place here. Today its congregation is diverse. This morning prayers turned to Rome.
And for the cardinal electors who begin their work this week in Rome, that the Holy Spirit may guide their discernment.
Here in the City of Angels, where 40% of the population is Catholic, there's a strong sense that the church leadership needs first to reform itself. This archdiocese was one of the worst affected by the sexual abuse crisis, and it's only this year that the cover-up and its own cardinal's role in it have come to light. Before his retirement, Cardinal Roger Mahony was the popular archbishop here, a champion of immigrant rights. But in January, a court-ordered release of thousands of church files showed he did much to protect priests accused of abuse, shielding them and their files from the police. He's been stripped of all public roles, yet he's at the Vatican and will vote in the conclave.
I think it is a slap in the face to us victims. I think it's a way for him to vote with his feet and say, I really don't care about you guys.
Esther Miller is one of more than 500 victims of alleged abuse, to whom the Los Angeles Archdiocese collectively paid a record-breaking $660 million.
I don't believe Mahony has the moral authority to sit there and vote for reform, to vote for the next pope that should have transparency, because he wasn't transparent himself.
Since the worldwide crisis erupted in Boston in 2002, the American bishops have led the way in creating strict new rules for dealing with accused priests.
Anybody need something to drink?
For some Catholics, though, the scandal reflects a broader crisis of leadership. Sister Judy Vaughan runs a shelter for homeless women and children. She says the all-male hierarchy has lost the mission of the faith to serve the poor.
Even in their numbers and in their members, they are not reflective of the church. We are the church. The people are the church. It has to be different because, for me, the church has become irrelevant.
Confidence may have been shaken, but there's no strong evidence that the abuse scandal has driven many from the faith.
Well, it certainly is a major crisis for the church, but the church has weathered crises. After all, the Roman emperors were saying the church is finished. And it wasn't then, and I don't think it is now.
America's Catholics are watching and waiting to see in which direction the church is heading. Jane Little, BBC News, Los Angeles.
States beaches in Florida have been closed as a huge school of sharks has swum close to the shore during their annual migration. There they are, thousands of blacktip and spinner sharks have been heading north, creating this incredible sight. Now, they're all along the route up the Atlantic coast, and so people are being banned from the sea. And that's just as the annual spring break festivities reach their peak. I'm sure people not quite so keen to go in that lovely water right now. Let's just show you the scene in Caracas. We can show you the thousands of people there in the Venezuelan capital because, of course, a little later, in a few hours' time, the state funeral of Hugo Chavez will be taking place. He's been lying in state. We've seen queues since his death on Tuesday of kilometers long of people more than 2 million people queuing up to see his body and pay their respects to the late president lying in state there. And today they're gathering again. Now what we have learned is that after the funeral later today, Mr. Chavez's body will be taken to a military museum to lie in state for another 7 days, and he will be embalmed. And he'll be placed on permanent display, according to the Vice President, Nicolas Maduro. Now, that Vice President, Nicolas Maduro, will be sworn in as acting president. And what happens then in Venezuelan politics, according to the Constitution, he must call elections within 30 days. So we'll be going live to get the very latest from Caracas, coming up here on BBC World News a little later in this hour. So do stay with us. That is the live scene there in the Venezuelan. Extraordinary scenes in the Venezuelan capital. Queues several kilometers long as millions of people have been lining up to pay their last respects to President Hugo Chavez, who died on Tuesday. Well, we can show you the scene live in Caracas there as people queue outside the military academy. And now that is where Mr. Chavez's coffin is on display inside the chapel. Now his funeral is taking place later in just under 3 hours' time, of course early in the morning there. Leaders from Latin America and beyond are also gathering. We've been hearing that Sebastián Piñera of Chile's just arrived. President Ahmadinejad of Iran flew in overnight. Well, let's go over to our correspondent, Irene Caselli, who's in Caracas. Irene, just tell us what is in store today there.
Well, the big story today, of course, is the funeral. Plans were changed at the last minute. We were expecting a burial today earlier, but then yesterday, Vice President Nicolas Maduro announced that the body of Mr. Chavez would be embalmed. So today we're still expecting a ceremony, but no official burial. And loads of foreign heads of state from different countries have been pouring in. And there's still huge queues outside the military academy where the president is lying in state.
Absolutely, we've been seeing those kilometre-long queues over the past few days. Irene, what is the atmosphere like among the mourners? I mean, I noticed that they're not dressed in black. A lot of them are dressed in bright red.
Yeah, a lot of them are dressed in red. There's loads of flags around. You can see there's actually images of this all over television, newspapers. There's been seas of red flags everywhere. And loads of people holding pictures of Mr. Chavez chanting typical chants that the late president would also use. And overall, everyone is gathered mourning, but also remembering the figure of a character that everyone says was one of a kind.
Now, of course, the vice president is also going to be sworn in as acting president today, so a huge day for Venezuela, and we're expecting elections pretty soon.
Yes, after the Constitution says that elections have to be held or announced within 30 days. There is some interpretation that can be done there. So we are not yet clear when elections will be held. We know that it will happen soon. We also know that the opposition has been in talks to pick their official candidate. The most likely thing, however, is that Enrique Capriles, who lost by 11 points to Mr. Chavez in the October elections, will be running again for the opposition.
Okay, Irene, thank you very much. Irene Caselli there in Caracas on a very big day. And the funeral, as we were saying, will take place in just under 3 hours' time there in the Venezuelan capital. That is the scene. You can see there has been no diminishing in the number of people who are queuing to see President Hugo Chavez's body lying there in state before he is then embalmed and put on permanent display in a military museum. We'll be back, of course, to Caracas later. Let's get back To our top story about North Korea, of course, it said it's scrapping all non-aggression pacts with South Korea. Let's get some analysis from Aidan Foster Carter, who's a long-time Korea analyst. He's also honorary senior research fellow at Leeds University. He's in Exeter right now. Aidan Foster Carter, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
How significant is what we're hearing from North Korea about scrapping these agreements it had with the South?
Well, one never wants to be too complacent given the extraordinary firepower that exists on the Korean border and also the extreme North Korean rhetoric. But there is a certain amount of yeah, heard it all before. There isn't an awful lot to scrap, formally or substantively. In terms of, there's the 1953 armistice, which as it happened South Korea never signed for quite other reasons. I think the main one they mean was they had a big pact in 1991, but frankly it was never implemented. Then in the Sunshine era, which seems a distant memory now, there were two agreements. They weren't called non-aggression pacts in 2000, 2007. But you know, the North Koreans talk like this. They've abrogated just about everything, often more than once, so I don't put too much store by this, quite honestly.
How hurtful is it for Pyongyang to have its ally, perhaps its only friend, China, be so instrumental in bringing about further sanctions against it? How much more isolated could they get?
You'd think so, but actually you have to read between the lines. And again, if I do worry about the young leader Kim Jong-un's judgment, if we were seeing his hand in all of this, but they have very experienced diplomats like Kim Kye-gwan who know perfectly well, if you set off a nuclear bomb, you're going to have unanimous condemnation from the Security Council, including China. And if you read the resolution very carefully, what look like hardline things, inspecting all cargoes, always have a conditional clause if there is ground for suspicion. So I don't think it actually changes much, really. If they are being more subtle than their propaganda is, one has to keep hoping that that is so, then it isn't such a big change, really.
We've been wondering what sort of leadership Kim Jong-un would represent. You touched on it just a second ago. Are we beginning to see a clearer picture of his character, of the new regime's character?
That is my fear, because, you know, I have been following North Korea for a long time, over 40 years. One is used to decibels, one is used to them shouting, but it's usually calculated and calibrated. It's usually clear what they want. Whereas this time the rhetoric is really wild, you know, threatening all and sundry with preemptive nuclear strikes. You know, sensible people do not do that. Only terrorists even talk like that. And in among it's not clear what he wants. So I wonder, he is supposed to be a bit of a hothead, and I fear that may be what we're seeing now.
Very, very briefly, that is an empty threat. Just in the last 10 seconds or so, this nuclear strike idea, that's just all bluster.
I believe that is all bluster, but I'm very far safely away from the Korean Peninsula, and we have to be vigilant.
OK, Aidan Foster Carter joining us from Exeter. Thank you very much indeed. Good to talk to you.
Thank you.
Let's take you to Kenya, because the High Court is considering a legal challenge that could halt counting in the country's presidential elections. Activists want the Electoral Commission to stop announcing results until steps have been taken to address their concerns over the process, including a software bug that multiplied the number of rejected ballot papers by a factor of 8. With more than 3/4 of the results announced, Uhuru Kenyatta is leading, but it's not yet clear whether he's won enough of the vote to avoid a runoff. We'll be live to Nairobi in a few. An extremely conservative country where women are often afraid to discuss their sexuality in the open, but for the past 10 years, one play has been trying to challenge those taboos. The Indian version of the worldwide show of the giant His funeral's due to start in just under 3 hours' time. Let's go back to that report from Bangladesh, where human rights groups have urged the Bangladeshi government to provide better protection to minority Hindu and Buddhist communities. They've come under attack during protests against war crime trials. And Barasan Ethirajan reports. His funeral's due to start in just under 3 hours' time. Let's get back to that report from Bangladesh, where human rights groups have urged the Bangladeshi government to provide better protection to minority Hindu and Buddhist communities. They've come under attack during protests against war crime trials. And MrSan44Man reports.
This is what is left of a thriving Hindu village in southern Bangladesh. None of the household items were spared after a rampaging Muslim mob vented its fury. The attack came hours after a senior Islamist party leader was sentenced to death for murder and torture committed during the country's war of independence from Pakistan in 1971. Even school books and homework notes of children were not spared. The beleaguered community is in shock. Saraswati Rani Das, a young mother of 2, lost everything in the attack.
When we heard they were coming, we ran away. They destroyed everything and then set fire to our house. We ran for our lives and my children were too scared to return. We built this small house with lots of difficulty. Now we have lost everything.
Even Hindu gods did not escape from the angry mob. Hindus constitute around 10% of the population in this Muslim majority nation. The two communities live side by side in villages like these.
Hundreds of people came and ransacked this village. They burned down their houses, broke all the utensils and beat up elderly men and women and children. It's not only here in this village. Houses and temples of Hindus and Buddhists came under attack in many parts of the country. The people here, they are living in fear.
Some say the minorities are attacked because they mostly support the ruling Awami League party, and they are a soft target as well.
This should not have happened. We feel sorry about it. It is not in the Holy Quran nor in the Hadith. Our Almighty Allah and the Prophet said that no one should do anything with the religion.
People praying here in the local mosque agree with the cleric. They want to maintain the communal harmony. The violence is blamed on the opposition parties, mostly the Jamaat Islami.
Jamaat Islami in Bangladesh is a peaceful political party and they don't encourage any violent activities. But people who are responsible for these incidents don't belong to Jamaat Islami. They are members of other political parties.
As Islamists continue the protests, Hindus and Buddhists feel insecure and want protection. They say they cannot rebuild their lives unless their Muslim neighbors reach out to them. MrSan44Man, BBC News, Southern Bangladesh.
Because India is still an extremely conservative country where women are often afraid to discuss their sexuality in the open, but for the past 10 years, one play has been trying to challenge those taboos. The Indian version of the worldwide show The Vagina Monologues discusses issues like women's sexuality and even rape, but it's still banned in a number of cities. Rajini Vaidyanathan reports from Mumbai.
Preparing to go on stage for a show which is all about one thing.
How many of you are comfortable with saying the word vagina? Would you please put your hands up?
The play, which looks at a woman's sexuality through different sketches, first ran in America. Bringing the show to India wasn't easy. Here, kissing is rarely seen in films. Sex is barely talked about.
Well, the hurdles didn't come from the government. They came from within our own community. Actors, first of all, refused to act in the play. I had no producers. I had absolutely no sponsors. And several theatres, like even the National Centre for Performing Arts and several other Catholic auditoria, refused to allow us to perform and still refuse to allow us to perform. First, women were reluctant to talk. They were a little shy. But once they got going, you couldn't stop them. Women secretly love to talk about their vaginas.
They get very excited, mainly because no one's ever asked them before. The show discusses issues such as rape, domestic violence and genital mutilation, topics which many Indians feel uncomfortable bringing into the open. It's fitting perhaps that the 10-year anniversary of the Vagina Monologues in India comes at a time when the country is debating attitudes towards women.
But why? Why does it have to take the brutal gang rape of a paramedic?
Another short monologue's been added to the show, dedicated to the victim of the Delhi gang rape.
For us to get outraged and march onto the streets.
When we performed the show in Delhi in January,
The experience was absolutely surreal for me because I really sensed a kind of energy from the audience and anger, and which was just so palpable, it was almost scary. It plays to packed audiences of both women and men across India.
Excellent drama, and this is for all women.
If people have more, they know more about this, they would start respecting the woman.
It makes you think on the current issues and how you actually treat women. In the decade it's been running in India, attitudes towards women have barely changed. But the show is playing its part in putting women at the centre of the discussion. Rajini Fadinathan, BBC News, Mumbai.
Day 14 brings no word from the jurors in the Kilpatrick corruption trial. They have begun their weekend without delivering a verdict. 7 Action News investigator Heather Catallo has the very latest on the verdict watch.
The jury continued to ask for several exhibits this week as they pored over the evidence from the 5-month-long Kilpatrick corruption trial. 8 women and 4 men are deciding the fate of former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick, his father Bernard Kilpatrick, and his friend Bobby Ferguson. They're accused of running a criminal enterprise out of City Hall. After 14 days of deliberations and only 2 official questions from the jury, many have started to wonder what's taking so long.
They're deliberately going through the evidence piece by piece, and it appears as if they're doing their job in the way that it's supposed to be done. We couldn't expect anything more.
The former mayor's presence inside federal court on Wednesday briefly sparked rumors that a verdict may possibly be imminent, but it was only a routine visit as part of his bond in the federal case.
He was visiting pretrial services, and I'm sure that he was checking in there, as he does periodically as a requirement of his bond.
As deliberations drag on into a 4th week, Kilpatrick's attorney says all the former mayor can do is wait.
He is in the office most days for at least half the day, and obviously we have no place else to go. We're tethered pretty close to the court ourselves.
7 Action News is standing by here at federal court, and as soon as the jury makes a decision, we will bring it to you. Reporting in downtown Detroit, I'm Heather Catallo, 7 Action.
Making a Difference. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Finally here tonight, our Making a Difference report is from Detroit, a city that knows something about survival in hard times. For young people there are so many things that can go wrong, but to avoid them, there is a place and a man fighting the good fight and making a difference. His story and their story tonight from Chelsea Clinton.
Detroit's East Side, a shell of the neighborhood Coach Collie Sweeney knew as a boy.
This was a middle-class neighborhood. This was the American dream right here. You look at this stuff like this now.
I mean, it looks post-apocalyptic.
Yeah, if you post a tank right here in the middle of the street, you'd think it was a war zone.
Today, Detroit is one of America's 10 most violent cities. So Coach Collie opened a safe haven.
Everybody slow down, normal pace.
The downtown boxing gym.
Pivot.
Here, kids learn discipline, confidence, and the rewards of hard work.
Well, it took me a long time to get good at everything I do. At least 2 weeks.
At least 2 weeks? 2 weeks is a long time.
It's a long time.
For the last 3 years, this has been Kadeem Anderson's second home.
When I was younger, I used to get into a lot of fights.
The 15-year-old is different now, no longer tempted to stray into trouble.
I want to thank Collie from the bottom of my heart. I'm serious. When you got somebody in your life that's willing to help your children that they don't even know, like he helped my baby.
Because Coach Collie got that same help 43 years ago. Just a baby, he was taken in by strangers.
Saved me. Of course I would go that far. They saved me. My life wouldn't nowhere near been how it is now. I know I would have had it a lot rougher.
The gym makes sure the kids get nutritious food. Without it, 7 of the 10 kids we saw wouldn't get enough to eat. Warm coats donated by Meyer's Superstore. And through regular community service, the kids learn you get what you give.
If you're going astray, you need to be pulled back to the right path.
Coach Collie believes in tough love.
You make a mistake in the ring, you end up on the floor. You make a mistake right now, you're going to end up on the floor.
The gym operates under one golden rule.
I think you got homework.
The kids must hit the school books before anything else. And the tutoring is paying off with a 100% high school graduation rate.
Went to college, trained, I got a job.
everything went well for me.
Coach Colley wants nothing less for all his kids.
Boxing is small compared to the big picture. The big picture is education.
To give everyone a fighting chance. Chelsea Clinton, NBC News, Detroit, Michigan.